On behalf of Center for Intertransdisciplinary Research, we welcome you all, and we take this opportunity to express our sincere gratitude to the event sponsors, BIBHORR and partners. It is our delight to state that the Center for Intertransdisciplinary Research is a not-for-profit organization which works for the welfare of the larger good of the society, and it has launched a series of women-centric forums over the next few months of the year 2022. We are excited to have you all on board with us today, and we look forward to your participation. Our eminent speakers for the forum today are the ladies who have to their credit many accomplishments in their respective fields. And I'm a strategy consultant and a policy advisor and an alumnus of IIM. I'm honored to introduce you today to our eminent speakers, Kanika and Joan. Kanika has held, just to give you a brief introduction of our speakers, Kanika has held several leadership positions across various international investment and custodian banks. She has been a former director of Union Bank of Switzerland, a governance and a transformation leader. She is also the chairperson and chief mentor of Global Change Force Women's Network. She's a writer and a board advisor too. Joan is a professor of national security at the US Naval War College and also teaches courses at the Harvard University. She has written numerous articles about women, peace, and security that are available online and has many publications to her credit. The views that she would express today in our forum would be of her own and not those of the US government. Presenting to you all our esteemed speaker of the event, Ms. Kanika, who is a multi-talented, versatile personality and investment banker, as already stated, a writer, director, chief mentor, and the chairperson of Global Change Force Work Women Network. So welcome, Ms. Kanika, to this event.
Thanks, Chirag. Greetings, everyone. It's really a proud moment for me to be addressing this forum today and being an integral part of this session. Real quick, in terms of the times that we live in today, whether it is economics, finance, technology, sustainability, or entrepreneurship, women have proved themselves through effective working, which speaks volumes for her. However, does it really mean that we have accomplished our key goal of gender equality? The point that I'm trying to make is, probably we are aware that the issues exist, but we are probably tending to ignore these as if nothing has happened. So this is all the result of what we call, the so-called unconscious bias. And to be more specific, I would say unconscious gender bias. It's one issue that is kind of, really becoming an underlying problem across all organizations, and not just organizations. I think it's a societal issue as well. It's not just limited to professional world, but to the personal world as well. So a woman employee, let's say, who is very dedicated and does her job extremely well, and probably is not very social in nature. Maybe she's not very outgoing. She likes to be within herself, but she's extremely dedicated to the job. She's perceived as if she's too timid to handle a very senior level position, opposed to a man, her counterpart, who has the same kind of a nature, but he is perceived in a different way. The perception for him would be he's highly focused, someone who can really lead a team of tough people. He's a people's. He can become the head of a certain set of resources, and he should be given some senior level position. You know what I'm trying to say, and you realize the difference that I'm trying to convey, the message that I'm trying to convey. This is exactly what is happening in the real world. And as we refer to it as unconscious gender bias, this is where the issue is. It's an everyday thing. It's a routine, actually. Hence, it is highly important for us to address this issue, acknowledge it, and when we say address it with the utmost importance, because it's very sensitive. We need to come together as one force, challenge and change the status quo. And it all starts with us, you, me, and the people whom we are surrounded by. So with that, I think I leave for you to, kind of put your thoughts together. And whatever I've just said, I think most of you would resonate with it. though you might have different viewpoint or different experiences from your respective professional world, but I hope that this resonates with it, and that's the issue that we are trying to address, and that's the basic bit that I wanted to really basically get it or put it to the fore, if I may say so. So yeah, that's it, Chirag, for now.
Sure, Kanika. Thank you for your interesting insights and such an engaging and eye-opening perspective. We now get into the Q&A mode. So the participants, you can also put the questions in the chat and we'll be happy to take. The first question that I have is, what is this unconscious bias that you're talking about, and how do you see it in the corporate world with special incidents from the banking sector where you have spent most of your career?
Okay, so unconscious bias is basically a kind of prejudice that a person holds against someone or something unconsciously. When I say unconsciously, it's primarily they are not even aware of the fact that they hold such prejudice inside them. It's all happening in the mind. It's the result of cognition and cognitive behavior. There are certain patterns to it that one adapts along their entire life journey. And these are taken as, part of their culture. It could be culture, it could be belief, it could be the surroundings, it could be what you have heard, what you have learned, what you've been taught, what you basically adapt and grab, as you grow. And it could be even as simple as the company that you keep, whether as a child or whether, irrespective. So like I said, it's an entire life journey, that the adaptations that you have from it and what you grab out of it. It's a process that develops over time. And while unconscious bias has several types, we are specifically talking and addressing the issue with respect to unconscious gender bias here. And this is a bias that occurs when someone unconsciously associates certain stereotypes with different genders. There are several incidents, to this that I mean, with respect to unconscious bias, gender bias, that we can still witness across industries, particularly talking from the banking world. While the situation has improved quite a lot from what it was years back, we still have a lot to do, and still there's a scope of improvement. Incidents over here pertain to the several facets. However, I will cover the most common ones, where I personally have witnessed issues. The first and the foremost being recruitment. When recruitment panel and the hiring manager favors male candidates over equally qualified and equally experienced female candidates, that's what we call unconscious bias. And the reasons that they will give, they will not even realize that, the reasons that they're coming up with is just made up. They think that, these are the genuine reasons that we are, choosing a male candidate over the same qualified female candidate, and we are giving a genuine reason. And the reasons that they give for disqualification of the female candidates would be, I'm just taking an example, that, she's too soft to manage the tough people, that we have on the team. So from a leadership perspective, she might not be the right fit, and so on and so forth. There are numerous statements that I've heard, not just for myself, but for my colleagues. I've witnessed this myself as a leader. So this is how an opportunity for a female candidate is lost. And this is how the roadblocks keep building on the way of the women to their path to what we call corporate ladder, which is exactly why you see very limited percentage of women leaders on the top positions. I have witnessed many of my male colleagues that I've worked with practicing this during the recruitment process themselves. I remember one incident, I'll share that with you. We had kept one women-focused recruitment drive back in a couple of years back. It was around International Women's Day, and we wanted to celebrate that, and we wanted to do something about it. So we said that, okay, let's have a women-focused recruitment drive, and obviously it is going to get embraced as part of our D&I as well, diversity and inclusion targets. But it's not about targets; it's more to do with the fact that you want to be more inclusive and diverse. And indeed, the recruitment drive was for very good positions. It was primarily the strategic roles that we were hiring for. So we had an internal discussion, a conference that we have had, because we were planning it, we were planning the execution, what we want, what numbers we want out of it, how many female resources we would want at the end of the drive, so on and so forth. So the discussion was going on. It was quite a serious discussion, and we were absolutely, in a mode of getting this done, let's do it kind of gesture. When one of my male colleagues, whom I used to work with, suddenly out of nowhere abruptly raised an objection stating that just because we are mandated to have diversity, why should I compromise so many male candidates against female candidates who are potentially to be hired as a result of this drive? You won't believe there was a pin drop silence in the room. We, especially the female leaders, we were absolutely shocked to hear his remarks and his perspective. While otherwise, if you see him, he's a very decent man. His code of conduct is absolutely amazing. He's very soft-spoken towards women. He respects women very well. What did really go wrong then? This is what we are calling unconscious bias, because he himself is not aware that he's and the reasons that they would give is, where's the merit? And even if that recruitment drive was not there for that 1 week, and we were doing a normal recruitment process we were undergoing, he would still come back and say, for the equally qualified candidates, no, I don't think it is the merit bit. I feel that the male candidate should be chosen because the merit is probably more there. So such are the cases. Another area of concern is compensation. I personally have clearly witnessed the pay gaps when it comes to male and female pay packages. And in some cases, the gap is too huge to bridge, even after salary corrections. It's not everywhere, it is in pockets, but it does exist. So gender equality is a moral right, I believe, and indeed a business imperative as well, that we need to really, and in order to do that, we need to, cut short this entire, or rather just eliminate this entire unconscious biases.
Sure. That was indeed a very interesting perspective and insight. And I do believe that, there is an unconscious bias, of course, that exists. My question to you is, we have great comments coming in, and we'll take those questions. Thank you for commenting. How do you think we can change this unconscious bias attitude in the corporate world, and how do you see it from the Wall Street perspective? I'm more from, the banking standpoint, so to say. And probably if you can share, the question here in the chat is probably if you could share 2 or 3 effective strategies to help close these gender gaps, generally speaking. Yeah.
Sure. In my view, we've got to have very extensive and frequently happening diversity and inclusion interventions. And when I talk about D&I interventions, I don't really mean just for the sake of it. We really need to identify the how and the what factor over here. Because when such biases come to the fore, we don't realize. So in order for us to really figure out at which point during that entire process, and when we say process, it's a normal code of conduct during your daily, day-to-day activity. We really need to find where is that happening and how is that happening. So in order to do that, practical workshops indeed are really, really important. I think companies should invest more and more there to figure this issue out. And related interventions can actually make a huge difference. But having said so, the interventions alone will not be sufficient. They won't alone suffice. You need to do a little bit more. You need to probably, relook at your processes. And when I say processes, this is what I mean. Other than that, what we need to do is probably look at internal processes and figure out through the data analytics as to where and how this is happening. So for example, like I said, you need to find out what and a how. But how will you figure that out? You need to do some data analysis of your current existing, whether that's a recruitment process, whether that's a training, so on and so forth. You need to probably relook at your functions as well. So in fact, some of the elements that we see covered, in fact, I have actually captured some of it in one of my upcoming books as well, which is Corporate Narratives. I've covered some of it in detail and more from a cognitive aspect perspective as well. Innovations and AI models that we are very much, using, and these have kind of become cornerstones for our business. These are very important that we utilize them. These are being underutilized for now, is what I feel. We need to start utilizing them, because it is not just about sustaining a business using these, just for the sake of market requirements that you want to sustain your business. So you put AI and you do some innovations to, do cost impact or improve your business. It's also about how to improve your culture. And are we using these tools and techniques effectively to make a cultural change and a shift? Which is exactly what is in line with the gender equality. Because when there is a cultural shift in the thought process, you're actually leading. This is a leading process. It's a roadmap, right? You can't just have it overnight. You cannot have gender equality just at a fraction of a minute, right? And you'll have to, because like I said, unconscious bias is a process that has developed over years. So obviously, in order for you to vanish and eliminate it, it'll take some time. So you need to, develop those, or rather use those tools and techniques to your advantage to get into that cultural shift mode as well. I think that's going to be very, very helpful. Also, we need to standardize processes, which means that we need to remove the subjectivity totally out of it and the emotional aspect as well. And everything needs to be worked around facts and figures. And when I say facts, it has to be what you see as is and not what you perceive in your mind. There's a difference between the two. So yeah, that's it.
Sure, thank you. That's true. Another question that we have is, you are a chairperson for GCF, which is the Global Change Force, a women's forum. What projects do you intend to undertake as a part of this initiative, and how do you think it'll benefit the members and other fellow women?
When we, started this initiative, or rather, the way it was born was because I felt, I really feel and believe truly that the entire credit of whatever achievements that I have today, or my success, accomplishments, the entire credit goes to my mom, because she stood by me always. And she gave me that freedom and space to fulfill my dreams. In fact, her sacrifices enabled me to fulfill my dreams. So which is like, she's really put in a lot of effort. She's been my inspiration and my guru. So when I look back, a few years back when I started this journey and where I am today, I feel that women to women, there's a lot of support that can really work out. While obviously unconscious bias and that, factor has to be addressed, but women to women support can actually change things. That's the starting point. So whenever, situations when people demotivate you and, you obviously feel like you are probably feeling you can't really, because if someone has really challenged you and has demeaned you, obviously there's an effect mentally and psychologically. So that all requires a moral support, that requires some sort of mentoring, that requires some sort of a person you can go to. It's like a go-to point of contact, right? So this entire concept of global change force, women network, actually was an outcome of that. So the idea was that we put some very strong models in place which really work, and those models should not just be for the sake of it. These should be workable models. So what we did, we are doing one of our models is called mentor-mentee model, which clearly addresses the issue that are not generally spoken about at the workplace, but do impact the women workforce mentally and psychologically. So one of it is that we are addressing that issue from that perspective. We will have a couple of members who are obviously joining, and we are growing, and these people will have, one section will be the set of mentees, the other section will be the set of mentors, and we will have that kind of an engagement where people really, the women can speak their heart out, what they generally can't. The second is the peer-to-peer support. Now, mentor-mentee would generally have on one side a person who is more experienced, and mentee on the other side who is probably just getting into the corporate world, getting into the bigger scheme of things. But peer-to-peer is clearly irrespective of the number of years of experience you carry. You are pretty much on the same page, right? So from that model, we said that we should work on those lines to support each other, to elevate rather each other in respective job roles, rather than because at some instances it is said that a woman envies the other women when it comes to competition. I don't feel it. I believe it the other way around. If women supports the other women in helping her elevate and grow up the corporate ladder, it can really change the entire game. The other model that we have in place is the change leaders model, for which the new ventures and entrepreneurial efforts are being put so that we make women more independent. So whether or not they are obviously we will skill them up for the jobs, but in case not everybody would want to get into a corporate world, they want to venture into something by themselves. So we are trying to create that model as well. In fact, we welcome from this group in today's forum, if somebody wants to join our global change force, we are more than welcome. I mean, they're more than welcome to join us. I'm happy to welcome them on board. In fact, if you really feel and believe that it resonates with what I'm talking about, and if you feel that this can really make a difference both for you, or you can make a difference to the society, you're more than welcome to join us. In fact, I'll be happy to share an email ID where you can write us in becoming a member for free. We're not charging anything for that. So yeah, that's about it.
Sure. Thank you so much, Kanika. We have excellent comments coming in as well. There are some feedbacks. People say that these are one of the evidence-based, accurate, and timely strategies. Thank you for sharing them. And somebody says, D&I activities and practical workshops, education, data-driven to help support these activities. So basically, somebody has written, wow, presenter, Kanika is amazing. So thank you, Kanika, for such insightful session. And I guess many ladies who are present here who have heard you today would have got much required motivation and will be able to relate to some of the incidents you shared. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I appreciate it.
Now, we are going a little over the time. Now we have another esteemed speaker, Joan, who is here. She's a university professor at the U.S. Naval War College in Newport, where she teaches security studies. She teaches at Harvard University as well with the subjects on women, peace, and security. Her books are also on women, peace, and security. And with the new one, which is in works, is Women versus Women, the Case for Cooperation, which is coming up in April, where her views related to women are reflected. So we welcome you, Joan, to the forum. And if you could just brief us on women, peace, and security, and then we'll have a Q&A.
Thank you very much for welcoming me. And I've had the pleasure of kind of listening for the past 15 or 20 minutes to Kanika. And I have to say, I agree wholeheartedly with every word that she has said, that you've said. And the new book that was just mentioned deals with exactly what you were saying, that women need to work together to make real change. And I think we're taught from a very young age that we have to compete, and it puts us in a very bad situation. So I wholeheartedly support all that you said. But what I'd like to do is take the opportunity to take exactly what Kanika has said about women at an individual level and talk about the effects of gender inequality at a global level. The Women, Peace, and Security framework that I have taught about, that I've written about, dates back to the year 2000, when United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 was passed at the United Nations by a very high majority vote. And what it did is, for the first time, codified the idea that gender is a factor in security, that gender equality or gender inequality is not just a social justice issue. And I say just not to berate or belittle what that means, but it's also a security issue. And I think part of what happens is this idea of gender inequality is too often used as a bargaining chip. It's a good idea, but when we deal with harder things, we can put it aside until later. And what 1325 did was say, no, women are active agents in security. Gender inequality is a factor. And again, to reflect back to what Kanika said, it's all based on data. It's not opinion, it's data. The Women, Peace, and Security framework has 4 pillars. We say 4 pillars: participation, protection, prevention, and relief and recovery. And what that means, to take them one by one, is we need more women involved in security making decisions. And security is a very big word. One of the, I guess, positive byproducts of COVID has been more or less a global recognition that the roles that women play in caregiving are not just women's issues. They are family issues, they are corporate issues, they're security issues. So it's the idea of what can we do to get more women involved? And again, as was just pointed out, there are so many roadblocks at so many levels. Protection acknowledges the reality that in many countries, violence against women is very high. Even in countries where there are laws that are to protect women, there is still very high levels of femicide, of women being penalty-free targets, that violent crimes can be taken against them with no penalty. The third pillar is prevention. And what that does is acknowledges that when women are involved in security affairs, things go better. And that's based on data. If I can just give you a few data points. Research by a woman named Valerie Hudson at Texas A&M University has shown that when gender equality is high, countries are more stable. When there is high levels of gender inequality, your country is twice as likely to be fragile. It's 3.5 times as likely to have a autocratic, corrupt, and less efficient and effective government, and 1.5 times as likely to be violent and unstable. It's also been shown that when women are involved in peace treaties, in the negotiation of peace treaties, that they will get more to the root cause of issues, not only because they have different sources of information and different perceptions of problems, but because women communicate differently. They will bring things up that men usually will not. But when women are involved in these treaty negotiations, the chance that the peace will hold for 2 years goes up by 20%, by 35% that the peace treaty will last for 15 years or more. So again, all this is based on data. And the fourth pillar is called relief and recovery. And what that says is that in areas that have been stricken by conflict and violence, when relief and recovery efforts are initiated, it should be acknowledged that these efforts affect men, women, boys, and girls differently. To just give you a couple of examples, in Haiti, after the devastating hurricanes, tsunamis, all the terrible things that seemed to happen in Haiti, when the relief workers went in, they didn't think about where to put latrine facilities for women under lighting with locks on the doors. Women didn't feel safe using them, and so didn't. It's just considering how policies and programs affect individuals differently. These 4 pillars, sometimes they're hard to remember. Sometimes when people say, well, what does that really mean? I summarize it with 2 categories. One is what we call inclusive diversity. And what that means, again, is going back to what Kanika said, having more women involved and having them involved in ways where they feel supported, where they feel free to speak up, where their views will be heard and not spoken over or ignored. And the second is what we call consideration of gendered perspectives. And that is, again, this recognition that policies and programs affect people differently. I give 2 examples of those. One is that in the United States, I don't know if it's true in India as well, but more women than men die in car accidents. It's not because we are worse drivers. It's because the crash dummies that are used to set safety standards are built according to men's body measurements, not women's. So they're not as effective for women. So more women are hurt and die in car crashes. If you take that to an international level, the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome says that if we were just to take the amount of global aid that is given for food, for growing food, and distribute it differently, if we distribute it according to who works the land, which is in many countries more often than not women, rather than who owns the land, which is usually men, we could increase food production to the extent that 100 to 150 million more individuals could be less hungry. So the Women, Peace, and Security framework, this initiative, is part of the gender equality movement, but taken to a level, a national and an international level, towards a more stable security and a more positive peace.
Sure. Thank you so much, Joan, for such interesting insights. I know UN Security Council's resolution has paid attention to, on calling for women's engagement in conflict resolution and global peace building efforts. How and why did you get involved in Women, Peace and Security framework, and how was it?
Well, it's an interesting question. I'm an academic. And for the long arc of my academic career, I worked in the field of space security, literally missiles and rockets in outer space. So it's a very male-dominated field. And I worked for the US military as a teacher, so another male-dominated field. And about 10 years ago, now keep in mind, the Women, Peace, and Security framework was passed in 2000, so it's more than 20 years old. About 10 years ago, I was invited to a Women, Peace, and Security conference. And I very arrogantly said, no, thank you, because I assumed I teach security. I'm a woman. What could I be? What could I learn? It wasn't until about a year later that I went, and it literally changed the direction of my career, because I felt it's so important. Understanding the links between gender equality, gender inequality, and stability and security. Things don't just happen randomly. These are all part of a very biased, very prejudiced, male-structured system, which omits women to a very large extent. And it's only been recently that we've been able to get involved. But again, going back to all of Kanika's very insightful comments, there is so much more to do, and it requires not just women working together, but getting men to understand the benefits of gender equality. We have a term in the United States that describes this unconscious bias. We call it blind fish. And it refers to just a little analogy of two fish swimming in a goldfish bowl, and one fish says to the other, "How do you like the water?" And the other fish says, "What's water?" If you aren't experiencing bias, you don't understand bias. It doesn't touch you. So working on women, peace, and security has become my focus because I want to share awareness. Usually when I talk about the topic, I will start by asking the audience, how many people have ever heard of this framework? And it's usually, no matter how large the audience, whether it's 10 people or 300, it's usually less than 10% have even heard of it 20 plus years later. So I view it as my kind of role as an academic to spread awareness.
Sure. Thank you. That was quite insightful. And talking about the UN Security Council's resolutions 1325, which was passed in 2000, how is the implementation coming, and what do you think are the challenges to its implementation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Implementation was left to the national level, and that's to be done through what they call National Action Plans, or NAPs. And this was to set up a framework, a roadmap for how countries would work towards gender equality and inclusion and security. As of now, 22 years later, about 81 countries have a national action plan, but only a third of them have a budget attached. And as we all know, individuals, organizations, and countries, you can tell what they prioritize by what they spend money on. So UNSCR 1325, or the Women, Peace, and Security Framework, has gotten a lot of rhetorical support, but unfortunately not as much actual support. I did a little looking before today, and I did not find that India has a national action plan. There are several countries in the region that do. but I didn't find one for India. I hope there is work being done in the country working towards one, but having a national action plan is only a first step. In the United States, as of 2017, we actually have a law. The United States was the first country to pass a law making implementation the law of the land. It has been very slow going, even with the law. So there are many challenges. They are largely fall into two categories, structural and cultural. The structural ones that can be changed by policy and law. Those are very slow going. And many of the countries that have these national action plans put caveats to them that made them almost what we call toothless. They are merely performative. But once you get past the structural needs, then it's a matter of culture. And that is sometimes the hardest change to make, to convince people that it's a good idea. And if we go back to looking at it at kind of a more micro level, even when there's a woman in charge of an organization, that doesn't mean that there's gender equality throughout, because very often it's the middle managers that are the problem when it comes to recruiting, promotion, retention, all those things that Kanika talked about. And if you just take that and expand it to a national and global level, you can see the problems that you will run up against.
Right, agree. And I think we do work on, policy research and policy implementations. The biggest challenge, as you rightly said, Joan, is not, developing a national policy. It's implementation. How is it implemented? And that's, I think, where we need a lot of work, whether it's US or India or any other part of the world. Another question that I have for you is, what's the difference between WPA's framework and the feminist foreign policy, which we also hear about in relation to advancing gender equality? And how does this relate to the views expressed in two of your books on WPAs?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because there very often is confusion. What is women, peace, and security? What is feminist foreign policy? They both stem from the same basis. They are both working towards, again, this idea of positive peace. Peace is a very broad concept. Negative peace is there's no fighting, but there are not conditions for development, individual and national development. Positive peace says that there is no conflict, but there are also conditions that work towards political, social, and economic development. So they both stem from that. The difference is, whereas women, peace, and security works on, again, these four pillars: participation, protection, prevention, relief, and recovery, feminist foreign policy, they say they work on the 3+ R's: rights, women's rights, gender equality rights, representation, again, very similar to participation, resources, putting your money where your policy is, and the reality that we live in, which is a society which is geared more towards men. There's an expression, no country treats its women as well as it treats its men. So the reality they are talking about is that one. The feminist foreign policy first was recognized through Sweden when the minister there, the Margot Wallström, announced that Sweden would adopt a feminist foreign policy. Since then, other countries have also announced that they too would either support a feminist foreign policy or aspects of one. But governments are many-armed octopus. So one arm can sometimes not know what the other arm is doing. And I say that because Mexico, for example, has announced that it will adopt a feminist foreign policy. But Mexico currently has one of the highest rates of femicide in the world. So extreme violence against women, but they're adopting a feminist foreign policy. I think, again, it's important that we recognize they're working from the same place. They're working towards the same goals, but different directions. What feminist foreign policy supporters sometimes argue against regarding women, peace, and security is the idea of protection has sometimes given countries excuses for violence. And in that, the example they most often cite is the United States in both Iraq and Afghanistan repeatedly said it was sending in troops to protect women. Well, and then again, the classic example is when the United States left Afghanistan, the women who had stood up, who had done exactly what the United States asked them to do, were left very vulnerable. I would mention there's a new article out by my teaching assistant at Harvard, Melissa Deering, that talks about Afghanistan as a case study in if women, peace, and security principles had been applied, things might have ended very differently because they are predictors of instability. Okay. How that relates to my books, again, thank you for asking, is women, peace, and security is, again, not known by a lot of people. So I wrote a book to use in my Harvard class that simply introduces it as a subject for individuals who want to know more on a broad basis. But then after it came out, I started thinking, if this is so logical, if it's all data-based, why isn't there more support for it? And that goes back to the comments about women are taught from a very young age that they have to compete not only with men, but with each other. So I wrote this new book coming out in April, Women versus Women, the Case for Cooperation, to encourage women to point out how and why it's important to work together and how we can do that at an individual level and above. And I would give just one example. If you're in a meeting, and this happens so often, where a woman brings up a good idea and it's just ignored, chances are in a couple of minutes, a man is going to raise it and it will be the best thing since bread. So another woman or a man should jump in and say, let's go back to what Kanika just said. That was a really great idea, and I think we need to talk about it more. Support each other. And there are just little ways and big ways to do that.
Right. That's absolutely true, Joan. Another question that we have for you is, what can individuals do to promote women, peace, and security?
That's, again, there are things that we can all do within our organizations, wherever you are, in academia, in the government, in industry, and finance. Really press for gender differentiated data, because so much of what we are doing now is data-based, and that is done in many instances to convince skeptics. I'm sure many of the women who are listening have had the experience where they say something and are dismissed by, well, Joan, that's just your opinion. No, it's not my opinion. It is data-based. So stressing for data is so important. In my classes, I always suggest to students, if you are in another class, ask why gender isn't being considered. Why in international relations classes aren't we talking more about gender? In meetings, again, support each other. Mentoring is so important. As Kanika also talked about, women, there are 3 things that men count on for hiring, promotion, and retention. And that's, and they work for women in the same way, but they aren't available in the same way. And that's competence, confidence, and mentorship. Competence, women are very competent, but we have to be hyper competent, and we have to be careful not to show it in a threatening way. Confidence, again, when you have to demonstrate your competence every single day, it can wear on your confidence. Mentorship, having someone there to tell you the informal rules of an organization that aren't written down. If you don't know them, your chances for promotion and retention go down. So mentorship is, I think, key. So these are kind of all over the board, but all of them are important.
Right, absolutely. Thank you so much, Joan. Any more questions? The participants, you can put the question in the chat and we'll be happy to take. We have great comments coming in. Somebody says, good points, issues across all settings, including home, community, industry, academia, and government. Great concept of a 4P. All right, so I don't think we have any more questions. Thank you, Joan, for such an insightful session. Women indeed have a huge role to play in peace and security, is what I feel.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kanika and Joan, for such an insightful session and answering our questions. We look forward to doing many more such events, and we thank you for your time today.